I'm Idiotech, and this is my second attempt at my XCOM 2 PC performance review. For those of you who were lucky enough or unfortunate enough to view my initial video I uploaded to YouTube today, there were some factual inaccuracies in that video that I wanted to correct, so I took the video down, and this is my second attempt. Now, the performance issues I raised are still completely valid. However, there is a VSync problem in this game that's caused by the solution they are using. The solution they are using is referred to as double buffering. What double buffering essentially does is if you're running below a certain threshold, it will cut you down to 30 FPS instead of rendering at, say, 50 or 45 or something like that. This is something that triple buffering gets rid of. And this game isn't using triple buffering, which is a very good solution, and apparently they chose not to use it. And as such, if you run this game with VSync enabled, and you tax this game in any way, it will tank your FPS. So, let's turn that off. Now that we know that, let's get into the rest of this. So, I've now turned it off, and you can see the game is running at 27.8 FPS in the bottom left-hand corner there. This is not great. Now, this menu here may seem quite simplistic to you. However, we have a full 3D character here, 2 enemies in the background, and a whole scene which is animated and real time. So it's a good indication of the overall performance of the game, at least during cutscenes and over-the-shoulder camera moments. So, let's try and get this thing up to 60 FPS, shall we? Let's go to the graphics options menu. Over here, anti-aliasing. Now, if you auto-detect with my current hardware, which is an i7-4790K, 4.6 GHz, a GTX 980, and 16 GB of RAM, it will recommend these settings to you, pretty much maxing out the game entirely. However, that doesn't run even at 30 FPS, so their auto detection's a little bit off there. If I drop this down to MSAA times 2, which is kind of reasonable given my hardware, I'm not going to get 60 FPS, I'm going to get 46.2, something around there. If I want to get 60 FPS in this game, the solution I've found is to drop this down to disabled and basically just turn off anti-aliasing altogether. Now I'm getting about 70 FPS, which is reasonable. However, what you need to take into consideration here is the recommended hardware specifications for this game. They are as follows: a 3 GHz quad-core CPU, 8 GB of RAM, a HD 7970, or a GTX 770. I completely crush those specs with this system, and yet I have a hard time on max settings getting reasonable performance. Any form of anti-aliasing, and I drop below 60. That is an indication of poor optimization, and many people are now reporting that the game is in fact poorly optimized. Many people on lower end systems are struggling to run this game properly, and I kind of suspected that, which is what I said in my initial video. So, let's jump into the game. I'll show you some areas that I have concerns with, and we'll jump into the actual game itself. I want to show you this section first, which is essentially your base. Now you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm getting about 61, 62 FPS, and it's not utilizing fully my GPU. My GPU is running at about 82%, 87%, somewhere around there. It's not maxing it out at 99%. There's an optimization issue here. When I go into each of these sections, you'll see it dip below 60. Now, if I have double buffered VSync on, this issue is even worse. It'll drop down to 30 in most cases and then ramp back up to 60. But you can see it's starting to utilize my GPU a lot more in these sections, but back here, not so much. So I feel there's some optimization that could be eked out here, especially in this main menu. Now let's jump into the game itself and see how that performs. Now, while this is all going on, certain cutscenes in this game will run at 30 FPS. They're locked at 30 FPS. There are other scenes that seem to perform very badly within the base, and then there are certain animations during gameplay that also tank the frame rate. Now, I am running a very high-end system in comparison to the recommended specs, as I've said, so all the performance you can see here is a lot better than what you're likely to get if you're running a lower-end system. People with low-end systems and mid-tier systems are going to struggle to run this game effectively. Now, I do not have VSync on right now. We know this to be true. I turned it off. It's using my GPU 54%. I'm getting 30 FPS in this menu. Why? I don't know. Optimization issues. Again, this game has performance issues. In my initial video, I was confused about why it was constantly capping me down to 30 FPS in certain areas, and that was due to the double buffering, which I've already explained. However, this section of the game appears to be no different than my original video. For some reason, when I come into this loadout screen, it drops me down to 30 FPS, and it doesn't use my GPU at all. So again, Optimization issues here. This should be maxing out my GPU at all times at 99% to get the most out of my card, and it's simply not doing that. Let's go over here, select a medkit, which we need to do to enter the mission, and launch the mission. So, certain cutscenes, depending on what we see, this game is procedurally generated to some extent, so it depends on the cutscene, but some cutscenes perform much worse than others. Let's jump into the mission. And you can keep an eye on my frame rate throughout this whole thing, and you'll get a good idea of how this performs on a system like mine. This hitching problem seems to occur during loading screens quite a lot, in fact every single time, so I'm not sure why that is. And as you can see, the game's not able to run at 60 FPS even here with a couple of characters in the background, and it's not maxing out my GPU. So there are optimization issues here, there are performance issues here. This game is not well made, sadly. And that's a shame coming from Firaxis, that's a dedicated PC developer. Okay, again, FPS drops, and people with 970s, which is the card below mine, are reporting much worse performance than I'm experiencing. So now we're in the game, we'll run around a bit, we'll play with some of the settings, and I'll give you my final conclusion on this game. So this is my team, this is the environments. If we move around the environments, you can see I'm getting pretty reasonable frame rates. It's using most of my GPU, but I am running a high-end GPU in comparison to the recommended specifications. So we're getting about 90 FPS. Now the thing is, if I go in here and I just want some anti-aliasing, which would be nice, honestly, because the game does look quite bad right now, quite jaggy indeed, and I lower this, now we're going to get 60, okay? So this is pushing the absolute limit of what my card is capable of, and unfortunately, because we don't have VSync on, the game is screen tearing quite badly, which I'd personally prefer wasn't happening, and I'd like to have VSync. But the only way for us to have VSync in this game would be if they implemented a triple buffer solution that didn't tank your frame rate when it dropped below 60. So unfortunately, it's screen tearing and no anti-aliasing for me, which is disappointing, but not game breaking. However, again, if you're running a lower end system, this may not even run properly for you. Like, you may not be able to get a solid 60 at all and be locked down to about 30 FPS, which may be okay for you. I don't know. That's kind of personal preference. In a game that's an FPS, for example, frame rate is incredibly important. It's crucial to gameplay. In a turn-based strategy, not so much, so it may not bother some of you. But for me personally, I prefer my games to run at 60 FPS. Okay, let's move some of these guys around. Now, everything seems fine right now, but I want to illustrate to you this double buffering issue. So if I go in here and I turn on VSync and I save and exit, you're going to see my frame rate sticking around 60 FPS. No problem. As soon as I implement any form of MSAA, what happens is that the game tanks its frame rate down to below about 45 FPS, and you'll start to see the frame rate tank as I go over here, and now it's struggling to hit 60, basically. And what it's going to do is once it gets below a certain point, and this map may not be heavy enough, intense enough to trigger it, but what I was experiencing in my previous video was that it was dropping me down to 30 FPS and leaving it there. And that's a problem related to double buffering. So basically, unless they implement a triple buffering solution, which is more lenient on frame rate drops, then running VSync is unoptimal. As you can see, I'm losing frames simply by having VSync turned on with MSAA. If I turn VSync off, I will get better performance. And as you can see, I'm getting 60 FPS. So VSync in this game is a no-no. And if you want anti-aliasing, you're kind of stuck with FXAA unless you have a Titan. So those are kind of an issue for me, but not game breaking. However, as I said, if you're running a lower end system, I would be very careful about picking up this game. It does not run well on lower end systems, and many people are now reporting this since the game has just released in the United States. I would like to see a patch. I would like to see a patch to include triple buffering so that people like me can run with VSync, which would be nice because I don't like screen tearing. And I would like to see some optimization patches in various areas of the game, such as the menus, the cutscenes, things like that. If graphics card drivers are required, then fine, I'd like to see that also. And if you are running a lower end system, I would recommend you pay attention to the user reviews on Steam. Make sure that people running similar setups to you are able to run this game well before you pick it up. And if you do choose to pick up the game, remember you have a 2-hour refund window, so if you do run into problems, you can always refund the game. If you found this helpful or useful in some way, please let me know in the comments below. If you're having performance issues, I'd love to know what settings and hardware you're using and what kind of FPS you're getting in your game. And if you found this helpful and you like my channel and you want to support me, please like, favorite, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.